I suppose the place to start would be to describe the public education system in what is now Monroe County around the beginning of the 19th century. Tennessee, and other states as well, created what was called a land lease system to pay for public education. When the county was laid out, beginning in 1819, the people who laid it out set aside pieces of what were at least thought to be good agricultural land to support public education. So that, for example, somewhere there would be an acre or 5 acres or whatever of public land, and if you wanted to farm it, you could rent it from the government, and anything you grew on it would be your own. And the rent that was paid for this land went to support public education. Well, this sounds like a good idea, but like most good ideas, it didn't work. It turns out the commissioners who laid out the land looked around and found largely the poorest land in the county and set that aside for the land lease. Meaning nobody wanted to rent this land very much, and it just lay there and no money went into public education. I was pointing out the case of a place up in the mountains. This is a real place. It's called Jeffrey's Hell. It's a few acres of extremely hilly, extremely poor land, covered with bushes and vines and so forth, land that nobody in their right mind would lease to raise a crop on. Well, this was made a land lease area that was to be donated to Hiwassee College. Well, basically it amounted to nothing. Nobody wanted to go up in the mountains and try to clear this kind of semi-horizontal piece of land and try to make a crop on it. So Hiwassee College wasn't getting anything of it. Well, later in the 19th century, the system was clearly not working, and the government of the state of Tennessee tried something else. Instead of land lease, they sold all the land that had been designated to support public education and deposited the money in banks, with the idea that the interest the money made in the banks would then be used for public education. Well, that sounded like a much better idea, but a little problem arose in the mid-19th century that some of you may have heard of, the Civil War. The money that was deposited in a bank for Hiwassee College was deposited in a bank in Athens, Tennessee. And well into the Civil War, a troop of soldiers came in and literally robbed the bank. All the money the interest of which was to go to Hiwassee College was stolen, and Hiwassee was left high and dry. Well, so much, as we may say, for the Land Lease Act. Now, there was a kind of informal system of elementary education in place, roughly, in the early 1820s, 1830s. In those days, if there was a family that was fairly well-to-do and had several children, and the parents of these children wanted them educated, what the plantation owner would do was simply build a small schoolhouse on his property. This might be a rather crude building, just a little log cabin somewhere, and the plantation owner would hire teachers who would then teach his children or her children, and very often the children of the neighborhood were invited to attend these schools either for free or for paying a very minimal sum of money. These very small local campuses were what I would call almost fly by night, simply because we don't have much in the way of records from them. They were not sponsored by the government, so there's no big book in the courthouse that you can consult to see anything about this school. And that's about it. The best example that I know of is what is known as the Rockville School. This was over at Rockville off of the road between Monroe and Sweetwater. And it existed for some years, paid for by donations from local people, but mostly by the guy who owned the land. And we don't have any records. The teachers, the way it often worked very often was some young man or woman who was in college, say Tusculum College or Hiwassee College, might be a junior or senior and doing pretty well in his classes. Well, he would spend the summer at Rockville School teaching, and would be paid for that and save his money, and that way he would have enough to pay for a couple more semesters at whatever college he was going to. There was no formal accreditation of teachers. The man who owned the land, who started the school, would just say, "Oh, can you teach school for me?" And some young person right fresh out of college would say, "Oh, yes, I can. Of course I can." We happen to have in the Hiwassee archives a couple of grade books that were compiled by Sidney Galbraith. Sidney Galbraith was a student at Hiwassee College, and he taught for a couple of years at a little town up towards Tellico called Mount Vernon. And he kept his books, and his books ended up in the Hiwassee archives, and they're really interesting. Among other things, Sidney Galbraith described the problems he had as a very young man, still very green out of college, trying to discipline the people who were coming to his school. He made use of a nice bundle of hickory switches to be sure that they came to class on time and so forth. Hiwassee College owed its origins in and around a place called Ebenezer Campground. Yeah, that's a little flat ground in front of the main buildings at Hiwassee, and it was used for revivals going back as early as probably, well, I believe the earliest I've ever found was 1822. Well, there was a prominent local preacher named John Ross Key. and he started an institution called Keys Chapel. This means he built a small church house, roughly about where the baseball field was at Hiwassee College, and this was a place of worship. And buildings were constructed for annual summer revival sessions. We know that there were a number of small wooden buildings with wooden shingle roofs, and if you wanted to spend a week or two at the revival during the summer, what you could do was rent one of these rooms, and you and your family would have a dry place to spend. Many people also went to use tents. They had tents, and they literally camped on the old campground for 2 or 3 weeks during the revivals. Then I will narrate to you the fortunes of a man named Joseph Foshee, Foshee. He had quite an interesting life, and it tells us something about the educational system at what became known as Bat Creek Campground. Mr. Foshee was born in North Carolina to a very poor family, and his parents sent him to work for a local distiller. He was formerly called an apprentice. The apprentice system was very old in European tradition. If you had a child and you wanted him to learn some craft, maybe, distilling whiskey or making boots or printing books or whatever, you could apprentice him to a professional distiller or a professional maker of books or so forth. What would happen was the child, through his parents, would agree to work for the master, learning the craft, usually for a period of 7 years, more or less. And this is what happened to Joseph Foshee. He was apprenticed to a distiller. Well, at least according to him, and he is our only source of knowledge about this, the master was very cruel. He didn't feed him well, he didn't treat him well, he made him work extremely hard, and all of that. Well, at some point, Joseph Foshee up and left. He just had enough of it. And he crossed the mountains and showed up at Bat Creek Church. He had some relatives in this area. They said that when he got here, he had nothing to wear except a pair of pants that were made out of toe sacks. He knew nothing about reading and writing or arithmetic, but the members of the Bat Creek Chapel taught him his ABCs, taught him basic literacy. And he flourished at this, and eventually, when he became a seasoned adult, he became a local, officially recognized Methodist local preacher at Bat Creek Campground. And the only way that could have happened was because he learned his reading, writing, and arithmetic in Bat Creek Key Chapel Sunday School.